Mercedes found itself in the thick of a fight for victory properly for the first time in 2022 at the Dutch Grand Prix, and almost inevitably that resulted in a Red Bull related controversy flying around after the race. Mercedes' gamble on a one-stop strategy at Zandvoort was on course to leave Lewis Hamilton in the lead of the race after Max Verstappen's second scheduled pit stop. But Verstappen was able to retain the lead thanks to a well-timed virtual safety car period, which was called when Yuki Tsunoda's AlphaTauri stopped on track for a second time. The confusion around Tsunoda's problem and a less than convincing explanation from the Japanese driver afterwards prompted wild theories that Red Bull's second team had done its big sibling a favour. So could there really be anything behind this? Let's take a look. And as you come on this weird little journey with us, let us know in the comments what you make of the accusations being made against Red Bull's two teams. Tsunoda briefly became the focus of a race that was building to a fascinating final stint when he stopped shortly after making a pit stop, believing he had a loose wheel. After a confusing radio exchange where Tsunoda struggled to get a straight answer from his team on if all the wheels were secured, he was eventually told that they were all fitted correctly and was instructed to return to the pits so that they could be changed. Tsunoda suggested that his car's differential could be broken, but the team didn't acknowledge this on the radio, instead just repeating the instruction for him to return to the pits. His pit stop was a long one as mechanics had to re-tighten his belts, which Tsunoda must have loosened when he assumed he was retiring from the race. As soon as he rejoined, he reported immediately that something was wrong, again suggesting it could be the diff that was causing a problem at the rear. Having sent him back on his way, AlphaTauri then instructed him to find a safe place to stop once he was out of the pit exit. Tsunoda's stranded car created a virtual safety car period, which allowed race leader Verstappen to pit without losing the lead, when a stop under full racing conditions would have put him out behind the one-stopping Hamilton. This prompted suggestions both online and inside the paddock that this had been orchestrated between the two Red Bull-owned teams to help Verstappen win the race. It didn't help that there wasn't a particularly clear explanation for the bizarre scenario of Tsunoda returning to the pits suggesting he had a problem, being sent back out, and then being told to stop moments later because of the problem he'd previously reported. AlphaTauri said it was a simple case of the issue not being visible on the data until Tsunoda left the pits again. It seems strange that a problem Tsunoda said felt quite clear and made his car feel like it was drifting on the straight wasn't clear to his team back in the pits. But it could have been that a differential problem would only show clearly on the data when he tried to pull away quickly, and it then became obvious that drive wasn't being applied to the rear wheels as normal. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff wasn't impressed. He said he was speechless at the idea of Tsunoda returning to the pits with a car problem, then being sent out only to stop again immediately. The fact that it tied in with Verstappen needing to make a pit stop certainly looks suspicious, but a far more likely explanation is that this situation was just badly handled by AlphaTauri. Perhaps it didn't trust Tsunoda's feedback on the problem, given he'd already mistakenly said it was a loose wheel, or it didn't do a good enough job of spotting the issue in the data initially. For Red Bull, this level of deceit just wouldn't have been worth it. As we'll explain in the next section of this video, even if he came out behind Hamilton, Verstappen was likely to win this race, and his championship lead is absolutely massive, so Red Bull had no reason whatsoever to risk getting caught doing something that can get a team thrown out of the championship. Red Bull team boss Christian Horner even said the VSC was badly timed for Verstappen, as it was going to force him to run a longer final stint with the hard tyre, rather than coming in later and taking soft so he could hunt down Hamilton with a bigger tyre offset. It was certainly a bizarre episode that could have been handled better and more clearly explained afterwards, but it would take quite a leap to go from that to declaring that this was an example of Red Bull and AlphaTauri fixing the Dutch Grand Prix. The most likely explanation is that this was caused by AlphaTauri not dealing with its own problems as well as it should have done. The only sanction it faced afterwards was a reprimand for Tsunoda for driving back to the pits with loosened belts. Without the virtual safety car giving Verstappen a cheap pit stop, he would have come out from his final stop around 8 seconds behind and would then be chasing Hamilton down on fresher tyres. And we know Red Bull's original plan was to pit late enough that Verstappen could take the soft compound for that pursuit. So Hamilton would have found himself in the lead despite several factors working against Mercedes, even going back to qualifying on Saturday. Mercedes are convinced that Hamilton and Russell could have lined up second and third on the grid behind Verstappen had their final laps not been ruined by Sergio Perez's spin at the end of Q3. Hamilton claimed he was fractionally up on Verstappen late in the lap before he had to abort, and while he expected that the Red Bull's superior speed would have dragged Verstappen back ahead by the finish line, both Hamilton and Russell believed their races were severely compromised by starting 4th and 6th, which left them stuck battling the Ferraris and Perez. And Hamilton was still on course to take the lead after Verstappen's final stop despite losing significant time in the middle of the race. Not only was he held up by some robust defending from Perez, but as soon as he finally passed the second Red Bull, he got stuck behind Sebastian Vettel's lapped Aston Martin as it exited the pits in front of them. Vettel took several corners to get out of the way and was given a 5-second penalty, having cost Hamilton 3 seconds in his pursuit of Verstappen at that stage. So the question is if Hamilton would have been able to hold Verstappen off late in the race. Given Red Bull's pace advantage over Mercedes and the fact Verstappen would have been on tyres that were around 20 laps fresher, it seems unlikely. Verstappen was confident he would have repassed Hamilton, and Mercedes' calculations still had Verstappen winning the race. He would have just had to work a bit harder to do it. Mercedes found itself running 1-2 under the late race safety car after Verstappen chose to give up the lead to make an extra stop when the race was neutralised for Valtteri Bottas's stopped Alfa Romeo at the first corner. Mercedes' plan at this point was to keep both cars out on medium tyres that weren't particularly old. The team knew it was a gamble with Verstappen just behind on fresh softs, but given Mercedes hasn't fought for a win all season, it decided it was better to take a punt on trying to keep the world champion behind rather than playing safe and pitting both cars to secure a 2-3 finish. Mercedes had agreed on Sunday morning that its race strategies would be based around taking risks to put its cars in a position to win rather than just running a conventional race that would put it in a straight fight with the Red Bulls and Ferraris. And given the team believed pitting Hamilton would guarantee that he finished behind Verstappen, the pit wall felt it was worth the gamble to see what would happen. However, Mercedes ended up splitting its strategies as Russell demanded to be brought in for softs rather than restart the race with used tyres that he felt he was struggling to keep alive. At the time, that stop enraged Hamilton as he felt Mercedes had sacrificed a chance at making use of a track position advantage with both cars. Verstappen took the lead on the restart with incredible ease, but this wasn't because of the tyre offset. We understand that Hamilton restarted the race in the wrong engine mode, so he was slower onto the straight than he should have been, meaning that Mercedes' track position gamble was even more short-lived than it might have been if he'd blasted away with the correct level of power. The difference in speed between the two cars was so stark that Verstappen almost passed Hamilton illegally before they crossed the start line. In deciding to take the gamble of keeping Hamilton out, Mercedes hadn't expected him to struggle so much for pace on his used mediums against the cars on fresher softs, so it hadn't factored in the possibility that Hamilton could tumble out of the podium places. The team thought it was giving him a shot at the win, with a relatively low risk of him being worse off than if he'd made the extra stop. Once Hamilton had a chance to cool down out of the car, and perhaps he was filled in on the circumstances or just told not to criticise the team in public, he apologised for his outburst, admitting he couldn't even remember what he said on the radio in the heat of the moment. And Mercedes boss Wolff said the team had no problem with Hamilton letting rip on the radio. Wolff said he understood that the pit wall can play the role of being, in his words, the trash bin or vomit bag on the aeroplane for the drivers to dump their frustrations during a race. But was there anything Mercedes could have done to beat Verstappen? Even Verstappen doesn't think so. And we agree, Hamilton was so slow on used mediums on that restart that if Russell had stayed out with him, Verstappen wouldn't have taken long to breeze past them both.